Up front, I have to say that for the demo, I'm using a couple of Vagrant boxes that I spawned. In the Severalnines GitHub repository, there's a Vagrant repository that actually contains the Vagrant file that I'm using today. And this Vagrant file allows you to spawn a number of boxes. And the first box will be your ClusterControl machine, and it will automatically install itself. So you don't have to do anything at all. The ClusterControl version I'm using here is a similar setup. It's a vanilla setup. However, I did do a little bit of priming up front to ensure that we have something nice to show in the demo. After logging in, I will immediately be given a choice what I want to do. There are no clusters defined, so do I want to add an existing database cluster or create a database cluster or create a single database node? For the demo, I plan to add an existing database cluster, an existing Galera cluster that I installed prior to the demo. And what is important to know is that the only thing I need to do is only add the first node, or maybe the second or the third node of the Galera cluster. That doesn't really matter for ClusterControl. ClusterControl will connect to the node and automatically find the topology of the cluster that I'm adding. What we need to do is add at least a user that has enough rights on this machine to control the node, both for MySQL and for SSH. I have to change a couple of things here to ensure that Galera is going to stay alive and well, especially the node recovery is quite important. And we're going to add this cluster. Oh wait, I forgot to select the MySQL version. Okay, we're going to add the cluster now, and immediately ClusterControl tells me that there's a new job that has been spawned, and I can keep track of it. So I see there is an issue with the job itself. And I think I made a typo in the password of MySQL. Let's try to do that once more. Enable. And the job is running. We can immediately keep track of the job here. And in the background, ClusterControl is now connecting to the machine via SSH and checking whether it's a MySQL node, whether it can connect. Then after logging into MySQL, it immediately detects all the other nodes in the cluster and all adds them to ClusterControl. And it now registered the new or the existing cluster within ClusterControl, and immediately everything is available here. So you can add your own existing infrastructure quite easily this way to ClusterControl. So it's not only just about deployment. In this overview, you can see the most important metrics for the cluster. In the cluster example we have here, that's Galera, it has certain preset tabs. So the disk I/O is important for Galera, the flow control is important, the handlers are important. If I would have had a different type of cluster, for instance Postgres, some other tabs would have been shown up here. But the nice part here is that this is customizable. So you can add your own tabs here to see what are your important metrics that you want to keep track of. In this cluster overview, we can click on the Nodes tab, and the Nodes tab will tell me that I have 3 nodes in total. It will give all the necessary details on the nodes. They're all synced. If you click on one of the nodes, it will actually go into more details of this specific node. Next important tab is the query monitor, where we can just keep track of all the queries that are running, or the query histogram of all the queries that were running in the past and how fast they had run. Performance tab, also a very important one to keep track of the health of your servers. In here we have the advisors, which is a nice feature that can give you some sort of advice on these machines. Currently everything is fine because the machines are newly spawned. They don't receive any queries, and there's nothing wrong at the moment with these hosts. But if there is something going on, it will immediately advise you to do something and give you an action. Backups, you can schedule backups either on the database node or on the ClusterControl node. So you can also ship them to the ClusterControl node and then ship them somewhere offline later on. Within the management, we briefly touched upon the configuration management. Maybe I can immediately show you how it looks. So we have the configuration management here with a bunch of templates, and those templates can be edited and applied to the host. Or I can go into a host-specific configuration, go through it. I can add a couple of things or change something. For instance, I can increase the thread cache size to 1024, save it. Yes, it will be overwritten. So now it's going, ClusterControl will copy this configuration back into the 10.10.10.12 node. And then on next restart, the new configuration values will be active. Over here we have the alarms. The alarms will show me, in this case, my license will expire. That's good to receive an alarm on that. But normally you can expect things here like one of your hosts is swapping. The logs over here, log section, we have the jobs logging, so all the jobs. It collected all the config files from the hosts. And in here we have logs of ClusterControl, some error reports, and this is the new system logs I spoke about, where we can actually look at the MySQL log. And I can browse through that and I can see what is happening on the node. So suppose one of the nodes is having an issue, I can immediately look at the log files. Last thing I wanted to show in this interface is the ability to scale out the cluster. So I can add nodes. In this case, if I would press on add node, it would immediately spawn a Galera node. And spawning a Galera node would increase the size of the Galera cluster. If I would add a node now, it would add a 4th node. For a Galera cluster, that's not a good number, because if we get a split brain scenario, it can't decide whether it's part of the primary component. So if I add a node, I should add another node additionally later onwards. I can add a replication slave. We have a good write-up on how you can add replicated slaves to Galera and still keep or ensure that the slave can keep up with the master if one of the nodes dies. But what I wanted to show is adding a load balancer in this case. So I'm going to install MaxScale, the new feature in ClusterControl 1.2.11. And I need to copy paste the MariaDB repository because, well, ClusterControl doesn't know yet what OS your host is going to run. In our case, we run it on a Yum-based machine, but if you are actually running on Ubuntu, there's a different repository you can use. I'm going to fill in the address of the host. There's admin and MaxScale, password. You can spot that we auto-configure 4 threads. You can lower or make it higher. There's the command line interface port. I'll get back to that later. The round-robin port. Round-robin basically means within MaxScale you also are able to do a round-robin load balancing over all the hosts in your cluster. So a bit like HA proxy. Even there, MaxScale can be a bit more intelligent, and you can give it hints on, for instance, the database with the least slave lag, or the one with the least number of concurrent connections. And this is underneath the most important one, the read-write splitter. So the read-write splitter will automatically look at the queries you're firing against MaxScale and then determine whether it's going to a master or a slave. Or if you already are in the midst of a transaction, switch from master A to from slave A to master A. We're going to launch it with all machines in the cluster. ClusterControl will now run a command to create it, and it's currently running. Probably within like a couple of seconds, MaxScale should be installed on the host, and it's finished by now. So in the background, ClusterControl connected to the machine, installed the repository that we selected, ran the install scripts for MaxScale, granted the hosts, and now we can actually make use of MaxScale within the cluster. Within the cluster overview, it should be visible that there is a new node in the cluster. It's currently in an unreachable state because the ClusterControl process hasn't seen the host yet. But if we go to the node overview, you can immediately see that the node is okay. If you go in the node overview and then click on the MaxScale node, you will be presented with the CLI interface, but then from ClusterControl. So from ClusterControl, we can now do all operations that you normally are supposed to do as an admin while logging in to SSH into the MaxScale host. We can restart monitors, we can restart servers, we can reload the configuration of MaxScale, or we can show all the servers in the MaxScale defined. So we can see that all 3 nodes are within the cluster, and you can also see that one of the nodes in the Glera cluster has been elected as a master. This is important to know which node it is for the test that I'm going to do. So what I'm going to do now is actually show that MaxScale is actually working, and I need a little bit of